but with some very, very special attributes. You see, land plants like the snake plant have a variety of complex structures. Leaves, roots, stems and shit. On the resource balance sheet, specialized parts just require more cost, and it means they take longer to grow. And they only really produce oxygen when they're growing. Algae like chlorella, they're just like cells. They're like the bacteria version of plants, just reproducing over and over again, meaning they can produce way more oxygen, way quicker, and with way less space.
But not everyone was impressed by the idea, or at least not impressed by my first small growing chamber. Small growing chamber. Everyone was impressed by the idea, or at least not impressed by my first small growing chamber.
You're just like blowing bubbles into a piss bottle. When I came down here, I was expecting to see like multiple fish tanks, but there's just this one little bucket with a piss bottle in it. That's all you have. Yes. You're gonna die. It's like, not even green. It's just like pea yellow.
That's after like a week of growth.
Yes, 1 week gave me this yellowed bottle, and then I transferred that bottle to an even bigger bottle. And after another week, that bottle had turned into this bottle.
That is green.
Which quickly became these bottles, and were transferred to these bottles. Satisfying, isn't it? These 5 2-liter bottles in a 5-gallon bucket were my first prototype for a portable photobioreactor. Now, what is a photobioreactor? Well, it's a fancy word for something really simple. Photo refers to light, bio refers to life, and reactor, well, the life reacts to the light to convert CO2 to oxygen as it grows. And we maximize the CO2
I want to
that
get the
life
oil
is exposed
pots
to by pumping air into the bottoms of the bottles. But just how powerful is this little glowing bucket? Well, there is a consumer product called the Arium, which is basically a photobioreactor marketed to the average Joe. With a tank that appears to be around the size of one 2-liter bottle, they say that their reactor has the power of 25 plants. And that's using less efficient spirulina algae. So under optimal conditions, this little bucket could theoretically be more effective than 125 plants. But will that be enough? It's time to go back to space and find out.
Close me in, brother. All right, the door is closed. Test number 4, our number
But we can
1
mow,
algae
but then I
test.
have to buy
Loading
DLC.
Algae generator 1000. This is uncharted territory for me, but I'm excited. I got algae in a bucket. Mission log, day 4. I can either look out this lovely window right here, or I can look out this one. Yes, this window right here is quite lovely.
All jokes aside, and as I slowly dissociated beyond the surface of Mars, I reflected on just how far I had come. That is, until I noticed a malfunction.
One of my pumps ain't pumping. So we're only operating at 80% for this first test. That's just the way it's gonna be. Not a big deal. We're doing multiple tests.
But even with our 80% or 100 plant power, the CO2 still steadily rose in a surprisingly familiar fashion.
We're approaching 2,000 parts per million, and we're approaching 30 minutes. Dang it. Yesterday we tested with just 4 of the tanks bubbling. Didn't really notice a difference. I thought, wow, this reactor shouldn't really be like multiple times stronger than the plants. Well, this time I think it is a little... that.
So back before I multiplied my first 2-liter bottle, I began growing a separate batch using 4-gallon bottles. This was a bit of an experiment since my 2-liter bottle started with completely pure distilled water, and these would use the regular bottled water that they came with from the store. I did aerate them ahead of time to try and ensure that any potential chlorine or chloramine was fully evaporated, and then I meticulously prepped the water with baking soda, minerals, and plant food. The same thing I had done with all the algae water up to this point. I then evenly distributed the algae and kept this batch running in the background in case something happened to the primary batch, or just in case I needed more.
Okay, that's not gonna work.
Test 5 that I needed more.
Here are our 5 4-gallon tanks. Got a lot of light shining right now. Got a little fan helping to circulate that. I got a fan here helping to circulate. A little fan here pulling air through these holes. Even though yesterday
yesterday the small photobioreactor was only running at 80% capacity, it still didn't show anything. So I didn't want to do a test where I just ran it at 100% capacity just to show that it still didn't really do anything appreciable. So that's why right now we're running both systems. If this ends up being more than enough, then I'll just back it off and find out exactly how much I need.
But it quickly became clear that backing off wouldn't be our problem.
Seems like we're on track to have about the same result. I just want to get to a point where, at the very least, there's a measurable amount. Like, instead of being only a half an hour in this room before reaching 2,000, it's 40 minutes. That would blow my mind. And of course, this isn't a laboratory. I mean, I'm a guy in my basement. But I want to demonstrate that it's possible, that it's doable, and just about how much that would take. Okay, I think something might be happening. Everything seemed on track, but now we're at 27.5 minutes and we're only at 1730. Now, I mean, the plants run on CO2, so as the CO2 concentration increases in the room, maybe they become more efficient. Maybe they start growing faster.
I ended that test with 41.6 ppm, the lowest ever. And when I ran the same test again the next day,
30 minutes and we're at 1805. That's pretty good. I'll check in.
Where's the
and we
merchant?
hit 2,000. All right, 2,000 at 35 minutes and 50 seconds.
What?
we were definitely in a downward trend, and this test had averaged an even lower
Where the fuck is the
39.1
merchant?
ppm. But these results could still possibly be within my margin of error. How
Oh.
could I possibly know without doing
He's
way
here.
more tests or growing way more algae? So remember when I said that I had the second system growing in the background? Well, it wasn't the only other system that I had growing. Okay, so in my reading, I saw that the Russians had done something similar to this in the 1970s, and it required, like, a lot of algae. So I decided to grow a lot of algae, and to try and be smart about it. Giant clear containers aren't easy to find or cheap, but these 55-gallon food-grade barrels were less than $10 each.
Yeah, that actually just smells like a light kombucha.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, algae needs a lot of light distributed as evenly as possible, but these opaque sides rule out an external light source, and the only immersive algae light that I could find was $2,000. So I decided to design my own with some Amazon grow lights, clear heat shrink, and hot glue. The materials for 2 of these cost me only 5% of that $2,000. And with the addition of some tubing and aquarium aerating stones to produce fine bubbles, they could now slide down the middle of the tank and shine out in all directions through the well-aerated algae. Even though these lights are quite bright, it didn't take long for the algae to make them much darker.
The light is barely getting through now.
Or for them to really start scrubbing out the CO2.
I did it. I now have 100 gallons of algae. Tomorrow, I'm gonna try and breathe using just this algae and the algae that's already in the room. All right, we are at test number 7, I think. A very special test. Now we have 100 more gallons.
Give me that ash!
It's crazy. I'm so excited for this one because this is the one where something's gonna happen. And I have this tube.
My breath is the most dangerous thing in this room because it has the highest concentration of carbon dioxide. So this tube is connected to the intake of the air pumps. That way, it runs my breath directly through the algae, giving them more food and scrubbing out as much CO2 as possible right away.
We got the beeping going because we just crossed into 1,500 territory. 1,500. We're at almost 24 minutes. I think we're doing really well.
And now for the first time in this whole process, I was surprised in a good way.
Whoa, no way. No way. It's only gone up 75 parts per million in the last 6 minutes. How is that possible? 30 minutes and we're at 1,588. I'm just gonna sit here puffing on this for a while.
The CO2 increase kept slowing down the higher it got. Maybe because the algae was getting more efficient, or maybe because we were approaching equilibrium. But either way, I wasn't complaining.
Okay, we are at 39 minutes. And we're at 1760. The CO2 is crawling. It's at 99. We're at 99. I'm not feeling lightheaded or anything. I'm feeling perfectly normal. 1,800. We just reached 1,800 parts per million, and now we're at 43 minutes.
And just like that, the 40-minute milestone was in the rearview mirror.
Can't believe I've made it this far. Like 2 months ago, I was like, I should probably start growing algae.
And while I was looking in that rearview mirror, I found myself reflected.
No, I've had a lot of projects lately, like my rubber band car that only went, like not even 5 miles an hour. I'm not gonna complain and say it's hard. Like obviously it's hard. It's a ton of work. But I'm glad I did this one. A part of me wonders, I don't know if this video will do well. It's kind of, I think it's really cool. I think it's really cool. He said as he breathed into a tube.
With our over 100 gallons of algae, it took us 55 minutes to reach 2,000 parts per million for an insane average ppm of 24.5. And I had a plan to do even better.
I'm gonna get more air pumps, and we're gonna let the algae keep growing. I'm gonna do this again tomorrow. Why am I still breathing into this tube? Just got another pump and more tubing and aquarium stones. I'm super excited. We're gonna double the airflow through it. Certainly there was no way we were maximizing the surface area of that algae. This could make all the difference. This could be the final brick in the foundation of being able to breathe in space or in this sealed space in my basement. I'm excited. Test number 8. We got the 2 air pumps. I've got them both hooked up to this funnel. That's a weird feeling when this sucks to your face. Wow. We're at 15 minutes and we're at 1110 parts per million. I don't know. It's so non-linear. It's not even worth really speculating.
Meaning, like always, we probably wouldn't see a big difference until the levels got higher.
This thing keeps sucking to my face. I just realized that as I get closer and closer to the finish line, I'm gonna have to spend a lot more time in this room.
You see, as a differential approaches equilibrium, it slows down. Big gap, big movement. Small gap, small movement. So finding the level where the CO2 actually stops going up could take a long time.
I'm the one who devised this whole premise and these experiments. It's my decision. It's still a long time to sit in a room with a funnel on your face.
But I had never been this close to victory. Patiently passed the minutes to get there.
30 minutes, 1363.
But since I was only measuring CO2 and not oxygen in the air, I thought it would be a good idea to do a little reading.
Let's read the symptoms of hypoxia. Restlessness, headache, confusion, anxiety, rapid heart rate, rapid breathing, difficulty...
Nascent butterfly!
So, if I get
A fucking nascent butterfly.
start having anxiety vomiting or rapid
Why
heart
is
rate,
this
blah,
item
blah, blah.
blue?
Difficulty breathing, definitely quote unquote. Confusion, I'm always a bit confused.
So in good health, I pushed forward, and man, were we going forward.
We're just about to cross the 60-minute line, 1,700 parts per million. Going very slowly, but it's not stopping. I wish it was stopped. We're approaching 1 hour, 20 minutes. 1831. It was creeping and all of a sudden it just shot up 2,040 because I wasn't breathing in this. I was taking a selfie and all of a sudden boom. But
So 30 minutes had become an hour and 30 minutes. But that's just to 2,000 parts per million. And during my next test, I realized that my breath, after coming out of the algae, was being reduced by over 90%. Meaning the room might stabilize around 3,500 parts per million.
the most concentrated anything is what's coming right out of my mouth right now. And putting the reading right at the output, what I'm going to get is the highest concentration post-algae. Theoretically, this room shouldn't get any higher than that reading.
But getting there could take a very long time. So for the next test, I came up with a plan. Yes, that is a CO2 tank, and the plan is to jump the CO2 into the high 3,000s and then wait and see. Does it go down?
It's holding right around 3557. Let's see if we can make it go down.
And once the CO2 had mixed evenly into the air and the meter stabilized, I started exhaling only into the funnel and waited.
29 minutes. It's going up really slowly, but it won't go down.
I didn't dare speak and accidentally leak some CO2, but I checked the meter and timer religiously, waiting for the flip. Then it happened. And all I could do was silently freak out.
I'm so dead.
But the battle wasn't over yet. I still had to make sure that this was really happening. But as the CO2 slowly began creeping up again, I checked the output of the algae tank, and it wasn't great.
Alright, I can talk. Hey, the room has held. It's held right around there. It's dropped, gone up a little drop. It seemed like it's holding steady, but I will say that the air coming out of the big algae tanks it's like 4,100, so it's elevated. The success is tenuous at best. It's probably just going to slowly elevate over time. This is a system
Maybe I'm not ready to be
underpowered.
here.
I'm thinking that I probably would need another 50 gallon.
I think we should go to Farm
So I
Missoula.
built another 50-gallon setup. The following tests seemed to show stability in the high 3000s. So I added another 50 gallons, which seemed to stabilize in the high 2000s. But all of this was with artificially introduced CO2, and each test only took place over the course of an hour or so.
It was like 29, 15, 14, 13, and then it was 29, 17, 19, now it's 29, 10.
And you know, I just wasn't certain that this really proved that it was working. Plus, up to this point, I had still never measured the actual oxygen levels of the room, and I realized that there was no way around it. I was gonna need to get an oxygen gas meter, do a new baseline test all the way to 5,000 with the reactors turned off, then turn them back on and settle in for the biggest test of all.
And that's what I'm gonna do. Spend a day in the sealed room. But I haven't done it yet because it's a big deal to spend an entire day in a sealed room.
This really isn't that complicated. I don't know why, and I think this is an issue because people view scam as, oh, this item is overpriced, it's a scam. No, it's just overpriced. A scam is when you buy, there are two ways a scam can happen. A scam can happen when you don't have control over being able to make a purchase or not. Like, for example, insulin. You have to buy insulin to live. Or like other types of medical things. And so because of that, the prices get raised massively and you get scammed. That's one type of a scam. So a forced purchase. The second type of a scam is a purchase that's made that you don't know what you're buying. Or you are buying it under the pretense of one thing, but you're actually getting something else. And the reason why the scam occurs here is the lack of consent. Is that you consented for one degree of terms, and you got another degree of terms. You got scammed. Very, 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 so fucking simple. It's so simple.
It's illegal, and they didn't want to face consequences for their predatory behavior and gimmicky, horrible tactics. The Mr. Beast team is falling apart. Ava Chris Tyson is now a full-blown multi-viral scandal that just keeps on getting worse. Predatory reality of how they organize competitions and merchandise was not.
No, I think people are just fucking pissed off at Mr. Beast for high-roading about the trans thing. And now finally that like it's come back around that, you know, Chris was actually a bad dude, a bad girl, whatever the fuck. Guess what? People are like, see, like fuck you, and now we're gonna push it even harder. Yep.
It was made exponentially worse by another employee
Chris
now
CD,
saying
really?
there is no bias and Jimmy spends unfathomable amounts of money to ensure the integrity of what he does. But again, the atmosphere I see is one where a channel that pretty much always exploited people, hiding under an extremely thin and very disingenuous veneer of, but we give it all away, we're so charitable, while they get filthy rich off of underage gambling and people's desperation in the background, is now losing public support. I think it's deserved, but time will tell.
It will not lose public support in the long term because desperation never goes out of style. People have been playing lotteries for all of history. Like, I mean, it's not like it's going to go away tomorrow. Yeah, it'll never end. Exactly. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Like, as long as you put out an opportunity for desperate people to make money, they will always figure out a way to justify why it's okay. It's an unfortunate truth, but I think that's the case. Hope is immortal. Yep, and so is delusion and desperation. And the worst part about it is all three of those fit together pretty well.
it. Not sure if I'll cover the Ava Chris Tyson stuff. It's got about as much public scrutiny as humanly possible right now anyway, so it's not like I'd bring anything unique or new to the table, but this angle seems to be quite a bit less well-known, so it felt worth it. If you want to support the channel, there's links down below, a special VPN deal, locals and Patreon, and more, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, question everything, and have a nice day.
There it is. Yeah.
If you want to be rich, sell hope. That's true.
Absolutely. Casinos cashing in your social security checks for you. Yep, there it is. So, I don't think anything's going to happen, honestly. I don't think so either. Like, so this is like my black pill opinion, is that I think Mr. Beast has such a big audience that's global that a small contingency of the Western English audience being upset about this isn't enough to really damage the brand in a long-term way. And I think that after, like, probably they move past this, they'll probably just make a few videos. Like, I've always said that the best apology is better content. So as I said, Mr. Beast... He's gonna have to kill somebody in the next video. He's gotta up the ante. He's gonna have to. Right? Now, I've got a lot of ideas for Mr. Beast. Okay? I've got a lot of ideas. We could go with something really simple, like we created the Roman Colosseum and we're doing a live stream and people are gonna fight like gladiators, and then after one of them is subdued, your likes and dislikes on the video will cause the person to die or not. You could have Mr. Beast, you know, dress up like Caesar with like a, you know, the wreath around his head, and then, you know, like do the thumbs up or thumbs down based off of what the chat votes, right? That would be crazy. Okay, it gets better. What if we had Mr. Beast recreates Guantanamo Bay? And so you put a bunch of different streamers and random people in Guantanamo Bay, basically a recreation of that, and whoever can stay there the longest will be able to, what do you call it? Will be able to win like $1 million or like $5 million or something like that. Well, I can keep going. I can do some really bad ones. What if you had 50 people with a terminal illness, and you made them eat only Feastables, and the last one to die had $10 million given to their family. And then you take their bodies and you have them eaten by vegans for a separate video, and the person who can correctly identify which person lived the longest based off the amount of chocolate in their skin and in their meat would win another $10 million. Oh, okay, I got one. One more. You recreate the castle levels of Bowser in Super Mario Brothers, but with real lava. And you have people go through it, and you do it side-scroller. And you put it up, you do the entire thing 100 feet up. So they can't go around it or anything. They would have to jump down, and they would die from fall damage. And you could even play the sound whenever they would fall. And you recreate the Mario castles one for one. Sin's Fortress. Yeah, recreate Sin's Fortress. Man. Oh, man. I think we should stop, right?
are good, and many of them were already expected. Like I mentioned in my hand-to-hand breakdown, the new weapon types have a poise damage oversight, and it's fixed. Honestly, the only surprise for me is Carrion Sovereignty is not nerfed, so I guess my weapon art crit build will need to wait a bit longer to get updated, because I feel like this weapon art is a bit too OP, and will get nerfed eventually. Anyways, back on topic with the PvP adjustments first. I'm going to show some poise values here. Like I guessed, hand-to-hand poise damage is roughly the same as claws and fists now. And light great swords obviously do more poise damage than straight swords, while the backhand blade is in the same category as straight swords and katanas. I'm linking the motion value sheet in the description of this video. For these kinds of changes, it's really easier if you just take a look at the new values yourself. They increase the poise damage of dual-wield attacks for the lighter weapon types. I'll use straight swords as an example, but the buffs for the other weapon types all fall into the same reasoning. As you can see, pre-patch straight swords did 132 poise damage on many of its moves. This means that with our max poise sets and Vocal Talisman, you will be able to poise a hit of their attacks because you have 133 poise. This change is to make sure that there isn't a max poise meta for PvP. But they actually changed some other values as well for these weapon types, not just dual wield attacks. For example, offhand thrusting swords went from 88 poise damage to 104. Again, take a look at the MV sheet. Claws of Knights throwing attacks got a poise damage buff, as it was suffering from the same issues as the new weapon types. Don't worry, this change does not buff Scattershot Throw. The Backstep Talisman in the All-Crucible version got a nerf from 11 iframes to 7, which will make it a bit more difficult to fit for backstabs. This is also part of the iframe nerf for the DLC stuff this patch. But first, the Savage Lion's Claw. The first line is talking about the tracking, while the second line decreases the first hit's damage level from 3 to 2. This nerfs the stagger from 35 frames to 25. There are more changes later to this skill, not just for PvP. Next, Raging Beast, an Ash exclusive to Beast Claws, has its iframe nerfed from 8 to 6. This didn't feel needed, to be honest, as Beast Claws aren't particularly good in PvP. One spot though definitely deserves the nerf, and it got hit fairly hard. Its iframes decreased from 10 to 5, which is quite impactful. A big reason this Ash was annoying was because it was difficult to punish the startup when the enemy is dashing. Palm Blast's Hyper Armor is nerfed, but this isn't that big of a deal. The incoming poise multiplier for PvP has been reduced from a 50% reduction to a 30% reduction. The base Hyper Armor is still 700, so even if you're naked, you still get 1000 Hyper Armor now, as opposed to the previous 1400. Not a big deal in most scenarios. There are 2 spell changes exclusive to PvP too. Miriam's Vanishing's iframes got reduced from 28 to 16 frames. Previously, you were basically invulnerable during early magic cast window. Now you can actually be hit out of it. For the Knight's Lightning Spear, the initial Lightning Spear's damage is increased by 40%, while the little ones are decreased by 20%. The third line says decreased poise damage of all spears generated by this spell. This is wrong, as the poise damage is actually doubled. But upon even more careful examination of the Japanese patch notes, the third line actually reads a decrease in damage level. The uncharged spears have their hit stun decreased from 2 to 1, and the charged ones have their hit stun decreased from 3 to 1. So they mistranslated the patch notes and also completely forgot about the poise damage increase. They basically made it easier to stagger with this incantation, but also stuns you for a shorter duration when you do get hit. Now onto general balance adjustments, starting with the Light Greatsword. For some reason, the first charged heavy attack of Light Greatsword used to only have hit stun level 1, when even its second charged heavy, or Straight Sword's first charged heavy, has hit stun level 2, so they buffed it to hit stun level 2. Increased the stats and status of NPCs. Okay, sure, next. Increase the attack power and damage negation of summoned spirits, excluding Mimic tier when above level 5 and 8 blessings. These are the full change in numbers. The later levels now give quite a bit of buff to your spirit's ashes. The Mimic tier still uses the 1.12 numbers, but they're definitely pushing for more Pokemon trainers, and not just Mimic tiers, especially with a bunch of these changes to other spirit ashes mentioned later. If it isn't obvious enough, the most common change is will no longer stagger as easily, which makes them a lot better during bosses. Anyways, a bunch of spirit ashes got buffed. Unless someone makes a book request, I'll probably never dig deep into spirit ash myself though. Onto some weapon changes, starting with the crossbow and ballista. These new ones really got a bunch of tuning, with the repeating crossbow having the highest increase in attack here. But do keep in mind, later in the patch notes, repeating fire is nerfed to make sure it isn't too OP with the attack power changes. Repeating fire is nerfed by 24.4% for the physical portion only. If we take something like the Bloodbone Bolt and run the calculation, you will still end up doing more damage with the changes. The spread crossbow also has a status nerf mentioned later in the patch notes. This is a 20% status nerf, so I doubt it's enough for it to stop being annoyingly powerful. Shield of Knight's physical negation was increased from 55 to 60. Later in the patch notes, its weapon art is also buffed. If you counter immediately, the weapon art deals a bit more magic damage
give up,
and 5
Snake.
more stance damage. A nice buff, but I had hoped for a bit
Snake?
more guard boost. This is a big one. Euphoria users are in a state of euphoria. Did I seriously just make that joke? Yes, I did. Anyways, the Holy AR buff of Tier 1 is greatly increased, and the Tier 2 got a decent chunk of buff as well. More importantly, it is roughly around 50% easier to obtain the buffs now. Its final note on increased duration of the luster restoration effect is actually done by decreasing the decay of the luster. Since the decay is cut in half, it basically means that the buff lasts twice as long. This difficult to find hidden weapon definitely deserves to be good, especially with its unique gameplay. Yes, I said good,
Oh,
not
this one,
OP,
yeah.
but you're definitely going to see a lot of Euphoria is OP videos. Actually, someone linked me one already. I gave content creator Y another try because he is supposed to be credible. While I can say he is really fast, his accuracy seems to be inversely correlated with his speed. Whenever someone links me one of his videos, he gets even the simplest numbers he can easily check wrong. I mean, sure, make up some stance damage, because who is going to call him out on that when it's difficult to verify? But getting even the base holy attack buff wrong, how low effort is that? Since this seems to be a frequent occurrence and not an honest mistake, I don't feel bad about calling him out. Do watch the numbers you're getting from that channel. The Golden Lion Shield got a significant increase to its guard boost to make it a more attractive option on top of its unique weapon art. Just the unique ash alone definitely didn't sell me.
Oleg does this.
So this is great. Golem Fist got a hitbox to the fist itself, but only on the two-handed charged heavy. As you can see, the other heavy attacks don't have it. But if you're close enough with the two-handed charged heavy, you can get in multiple hits. The Smith script Great Hammer's change to the throwing portion only affects the one-handed uncharged spin, so it is quite the insignificant buff. And they lied, because they changed the poise damage of the projectile too. Ailment Talisman now immediately decreases status buildup after proccing, in addition to increasing your resistance. And they also buffed the Clarifying Horn Charm specifically. Not entirely sure why on this one. In addition to the PvP changes I've mentioned earlier, the Savage Lion's Claw got a small increase to its damage and poise damage. This skill actually still loses to Lion's Claw in terms of poise damage per second, but beats the Lion Claw on most other aspects. I might do a deep dive into this later with some other similar skills. Swift Slash's distance is reduced, and recovery time is extended by 7 frames. Told you the damage nerf wasn't going to be enough. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in PvP though, because Backhand Blade's poise damage is fixed, even if Swift Slash is nerfed. Overhead Stance is buffed for PvE. They did this by increasing the damage but reducing the PvP only modifier. This skill didn't feel particularly powerful, while also only being limited to the Great Katana, so this change is nice. Aspects of the Crucible Wings got more than a damage and hyper armor buff. It now has different values depending on the weapon type you're using. But regardless, it is a buff across the board. The hyper armor is not only increased from 120 to 500, it also comes out earlier, especially for the Twin Blades version. Light Speed Slash's bullet scales to the attack of this weapon now. This is kind of weird, because the additional light bullets now deal holy, magic, and physical damage. Yeah, not a fan of calculating this one. Rancor Slash was buffed for both of the spirit weapons. The bullet MV is slightly increased, while the stamina damage only applies to the slashing portion. This definitely felt like it needed help to be a unique version of Sword Dance. I don't think it's quite there yet. Revenger's Blade can make really big turns now. This is quite good at catching a target who is running away, and even for roll catching. The Horned Warrior's Sword got the same treatment as Overhead Stance, the damage buff in PvE, and a change to its PvP modifier to do roughly the same damage. Same thing to the weapon swing portion of the Horned Warrior's Greatsword. The bullet portion is untouched. Weed Cutter cuts weed faster, so it's even better for cleaning trash mobs. Pole Blade of the Bud received its much needed hyper armor buff on its weapon art. It isn't super armored though, so some skills can just knock you out of the animation even if you do have 600 hyper armor. They actually buffed Red Bear Hunt's damage by roughly 10%. They also gave it 400 hyper armor, which gives Beast Claw's build an option for hyper armor. This is huge for my Rugalia's Ravager build. Definitely check that one out now if you're interested in a double Beast Claw build. Rancor Shot's status buildup is nerfed by 20% for poison and rot, and 40% for all other statuses. To be fair, it was kind of strong as an upgraded barrage. The Torch got a status effect buildup nerf to its weapon art of 0%. The status NV remains the same, but maybe the frequency of overlapping madness application is changed. Onto the spells. Glint Blade Trio got a pretty decent buff which it desperately needed. This was barely doing more damage than the base Glint Blade, so these numbers should have been unreleased numbers to be honest. Blades of Stone got a quite interesting change. Pre-patch, charging this skill basically meant that you summoned the stones thrice instead of once, effectively making this one of the most valuable spells to charge up because you suddenly tripled your damage, which also meant that the uncharged version wasn't very appealing. They buffed the uncharged version and front-loaded the charged version's damage while keeping it about the same amount of damage. With the attack range and speed buff, this is a formidable spell. The Impenetrable Thorns nerf is very much expected. This spell summoned 3 thorns that hit thrice each. With the base 72 bleed buildup, you were looking at 648 bleed without any arcane scaling. Add on arcane scaling and you break 1k bleed buildup per cast easily. I thought they would make it so that each thorn can hit only once, but they ended up nerfing the numbers instead. A 76% nerf to bleed buildup, 50% nerf to raw damage, and a 66% poise damage nerf. The spell is still fine. You're still easily looking at 250 to 300 bleed buildup, depending on your arcane, with the maternal stab. It just isn't OP anymore, as it was always doing thrice its intended values. Rings of Spectral Light and Vortex of Putrescence both got a buff. The damage to Rings of Light got slightly increased, but I think the selling point is the 26% increase in Frostbite buildup. Funny enough, this spell is still bugged with the Godfrey icon. Vortex of Putrescence was already a decent spell before this buff, but I can totally understand the Frostbite buff. With this spell, you're more likely to just kill your enemies before seeing the Frostbite proc, so I'd say this is a fair one. Some of the crappiest incantations got a buff. Minor Erdtree's healing got a 48.6% increase, and the interval is reduced to make sure you get more out of its effect when you just pass by it. Land of Shadow got a buff to tracking, but I'm pretty sure you can still strafe this in PvP. I would give Spyra a radius buff, as the incantation is still quite crap. I understand why Watchful Spirit is weak, since it has such a low FP cost. I would take more FP cost, if that's what it'll take to make them buff this incantation's damage. Divine Beast Tornado got a few buffs. The damage is increased, and you are able to knock enemies up. However, the knock up only applies to the charged version of this incantation, and only to the few weak enemy types. Oh, we got a new incantation called Rain of Fire. I remember them previewing this incantation's animation about a month ago on DLC release. It's nice that players could obtain the incantation just for the animation first. In all seriousness, this incantation had a bug where many of the rain didn't hit, and they also buffed the damage numbers. There were 2 motion values that randomly hit high or low. Now they do the same damage on every hit, and we finally have the usable version, which actually makes it pretty good against big bosses. Roar of Rugalia got a pretty big buff. If you've watched my Beast Claws video, I mentioned that this was crap. The biggest buff to this incantation is actually its poise damage. The full charged roar now deals 42 poise damage, which is a huge 280% increase. The raw damage of the charged version is also increased by roughly 2.4 times the original, and the uncharged version got a large increase too. Very nice change. Furious Blade of Unspock got a slight damage increase, but more importantly is that its status buildup was bug fixed. It now builds up 60 bleed per hit over 2 seconds, sort of like how Bloodlane Blade works. This does not scale to Arcane, which is why you'll feel pretty disappointed if you tested it with a high Arcane setup on Dragon Communion Seal. It's a better tool for builds that don't go over 45 Arcane. The Rotten Butterflies got a buff. The initial zone builds up quite a bit of Scarlet Rot before the butterflies even explode, thanks to the shortened interval of rot application. But it still provides no hyper armor, and this incantation also costs 48 FP, so it isn't great. Okay, and some more bug fixes that I didn't already cover with the other points before I end this video. Torrent's revival got changed. Everyone is happy. Easier to summon NPCs in some fights, like everyone's favorite archer in the dragon fight. They fixed a bug where you can shoot greater ammunition with just a basic bow. If you know this exploit, you know it, and if you don't, it's alright. Doesn't exist anymore, like the chainsaw bug as well. Circlet of Light finally buffs Light of
Don't I have
Mana by
hyper
10%
armor with
damage.
this spell?
This doesn't work in PvP though, because of the holy bug I just covered. Also, they changed Dryleaf Seal's description, as this was not supposed to buff the Light of Mikila, but the Golden Ring of Light incantations that it was already originally buffing. Jump chain casts are fixed, like the Catch Flame into Magma combo. Just a bunch of great exploit fixes this patch, and I think that's about all the important bug fixes. Tell me if I missed any big ones. Like and subscribe for more real patch notes. If you want to support my work, please consider buying my fantasy novel or donating to my Patreon down below. With a book purchase, you can also request a topic from me. Krite, signing out.
Well, divorce. Wir entführen Sie in die Welt der Reptilien im Sedan-Center. Erleben Sie über 40 exotische Tiere.
I did want to look at this. There's a situation going on with Bungie.
All right, guys, let's actually read this. This is from Steven Totila. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Bungie's deep job cuts were in the works prior to Destiny's most recent release, sources says.
Yeah, of course it
The
was.
acclaimed studio has been shredding jobs since Sony bought it. Employee are focused on Bungie leaders more than the bosses at PlayStation. A second round of deep job cuts at Destiny Studio Bungie's in less than a year since
The
shop
second round. You know what that means? That means there's probably going to be a third round.
halfway through the games industry on Wednesday. Because we're not a sudden move. A sizable new round of layoffs had been planned by Bungie management for months. Before the launch of the studio's acclaimed Destiny 2 expansion, The Final Shape, this past June, two former Bungie employees told GamePop. Hold on. All right, hold on. What if The Final Shape would have like blew every metric out of the water and been, I don't know. Let's say something crazy. Let's say 1 million concurrent players on Steam alone. Then what?
Yeah.
The layoffs were announced publicly yesterday.
No, that's actually a really great point he brings up. I'm actually so glad he said that because he's right that they probably would have changed course. If things had gone really, really, really well, they probably wouldn't have done this. He's right.
Bungie CEO Pete Parsons, who said 220 workers would lose their jobs out of a workforce of about 1,300. Bungie is also working with a parent company, Sony, to integrate 155 more roles into its PlayStation group. Sony Interactive Entertainment, Parsons said. Bungie will also spin out one of our incubation projects, an action game set in a brand new science fantasy universe, and form a new studio within PlayStation Studios to continue its marathon development. Sony purchased Bungie in 2022 $3.6 billion, and was partially due to its development and management of Destiny 2, the sci-fi first-person shooter that launched in 2017 and had entrenched itself as a beloved free-to-play, massively multiplayer, continuously updated live service adventure. But Bungie's leaders had overstated their studio's financial prospects to Sony, and Wednesday's cuts were needed to stop continued losses that amounted to an ongoing reality check, 3 ex-Bungie sources told GamePop. I think Sony...
If there's one thing that I've learned about a lot of these game studios, it's that they have too many people that are working in the studios. You end up having like 6 people to do one job.
Overpaid Bungie, one of the former insiders said, on condition of
too much middle management.
To avoid damaging their career. I think Bungie sold things they were just not able to deliver. 2 of the ex-Bungie workers said the studio repeatedly missed financial targets promised to Sony and had been losing money since the release of February 2023's Destiny 2's expansion Lightfall. Since February?
Jesus.
What? Lightfall struggles along with the decay of the aging Destiny 2 player base and repeated delays to the company's next big game, Marathon, led managers to do a dire conclusion last year. Bungie, the studio initially granted continued autonomy when it was purchased, would need to make deep cuts to show Sony executives that it was taking its finances seriously.
Basically there need to be human sacrifices. That's what they're saying.
Said. Oh, smart. Last October, Bungie laid off around 100 workers, but employees sensed that might not be the end. In March, IGN reported that Bungie developers fear more cuts would follow the June 2024 release of Destiny 2 expansion, The Final Shape. That was the rumor. The rumor was Final Shape was going to come out and there were going to be cuts. I assumed that Final Shape did well. there wouldn't be cuts. And those cuts in 2023 were indeed understood internally to be insufficient. Two of the ex-Bungie sources told GameFile, at least by early 2024. As a result, Bungie's leadership planned another round. Those cuts couldn't be avoided even if for Destiny 2's 2024 expansion, the final shape had a blockbuster performance, resources said. Let me read that one more time. Those cuts could not be avoided even if for Destiny 2's 2024 expansion, the final shape had a blockbuster performance, resources said. That's what we were wondering earlier.
Maybe, maybe not, right? I mean, that's what they're saying. Like, it's one thing to say this, it's another thing to fire people after it does really well.
What we were wondering is if the final shape had just blown it out of the water, could they have avoided it? Jesus, I don't understand.
How do I get down here?
All right, reach for comments about detailed reporting the story. A Bungie rep referred.
The studio probably bloated as fuck. They probably got so many people in there doing shit they don't need to be doing. Like, after I've seen like 3 or 4 of these studios and like the investigation, like the way that they talk about what their work is, like, no. All tech is bloated since COVID, yeah.
Sony Public Relations, Sony PR did not reply to a subsequent inquiry. Now, our at Bungie's leaders. On Tuesday, current and former Bungie workers lit into Parsons and Bungie.
They're mad at him. They fucking hate him.
That it steered the studio into successive dramatic.
Just let me read the fucking message.
Former Destiny community manager Liana Rupert wrote on Twitter X. Inexcusable. Bungie community manager Dylan Gaffner wrote on Twitter X.
I just don't understand, like, why are they mad at him? Why are they mad at Pete? Like, it was just because they fired a bunch of people? Why, his job is not to make sure everybody keeps their job. His job is to make sure the company makes money. What the fuck? Like, why would he give a fuck about that? Yeah, he's the name they know. Yeah, he bought $2 million of cars after the layoffs.
Makes sense, man. Makes sense.
Industry-leading talent being bossed yet again, accountability falling upon the workers who have pushed the needle to deliver for our community time and time again. Now, Gaffner's social media feed is full of laid-off workers from Bungie's player support, narrative, sound teams, and more, reeling from the shock and looking for work. On Tuesday, Parsons himself described a studio that was overextended by chasing the goal of running 3 concurrent major franchises and greenlighting an array of incubation projects over the last 5 years. Dude, I mean, look, man. I remember seeing it, all the hiring spree that Bungie was doing, and what was so crazy was so many hirings were occurring that had nothing to do with Destiny. And then we saw
because they're hiring a bunch of people for things because they were over hiring for COVID, and now COVID's gone, so they're firing people. That's just the way it is. Yeah.
This project, that project, that, you know what I mean? It was like, good God. And there's no way they could have pushed all those out. I don't know what they were thinking. And by 2023, an economic slowdown made the situation worse, Parsons said. We were overly ambitious. Our financial stability margins were subsequently exceeded, and we began running in the red, he said. Even with the exhaustive efforts undertaken across our leadership and product teams to resolve our financial challenges, these steps were simply not enough. A critique of how Bungie management spent the studio's money popped up unexpectedly last year via a trial exhibit from a lawsuit over Microsoft's bid for Activision. An internal 2021 Xbox document analyzed potential acquisition targets, including Bungie, which Microsoft had owned from 2000 to 2007.
I'll tell you, like, it's a big problem. Like, a lot of these companies, like, as the CEO, like, it is Pete's fault that this is happening. Like, the CEO is 100% responsible for the money that the company is making and spending. That's like his fucking job. So, like, if he's fucking this up, he's got to make decisions. One way or another.
The listed risks, company is known for its
and he
high
did
burn
solve
rate.
the problem.
I remember us reading that.
He did.
That was
people just
they
don't like
got a
the
high
solution.
burn rate, but like somehow they haven't gone under. Now Sony weighs in. Tension between Bungie and parent Sony did not take long to come into view. In February, less than 2 years since Sony had announced its plan to buy Bungie, the company's longtime chief financial officer Hiroko Totiki said Bungie had room for improvement from a business perspective with regard to areas such as the use of business expenses and assuming accountability for development timelines.
I do think that, like, you know, if you were one of the, you know, if you're on the board for this company, if you're at Sony, you probably should look into his competency and see, like, why exactly is it that this problem keeps happening? Like, because you know, he made these decisions. He caused these things to happen. So, like, maybe they should get rid of him. Like, the employees can't understand that because, like, they're seeing, like, a narrow picture. But, like, the directors, they can see what the balance sheets are. They can see all the numbers. They can see where everything's going. And you make enough bad decisions and you need to be fucking out on your ass. Like, let's be honest. You can't have losers in there. Pete needs to step down. I think it's. I don't think we know that. I think the only people that can know that are the ones that have actually seen all the financials.
Seeing that, yeah, accountability for development timeline. So again, in their eyes, Final Shape probably should not have been pushed back to June, and Marathon should have been coming out this year, on top of whatever other games they were working on.
Yeah.
Notably, an initial live translation of Totika's answer didn't name Bungie and seemingly referred to PlayStation Portfolio Studios, but Sony made a point to clarify. Later, Totaki was indeed talking about the studio.
Jesus.
Wow. Also notable, Totaki had recently added chairman of PlayStation.
I have to say also, like, the fact that the guy, the CFO, is saying publicly that they're fucking up with money, they're probably really fucking up with money. Like, that's big fuck-ups.
That's wild. So in the initial live
really
translation, his answer didn't clarify Bungie.
Can you
But
even
just to
dodge this
follow up,
thing?
He made it clear that he was in fact talking about Bungie.
I don't think
And
so,
made Sony
man.
message question to Totaki about when the company would reach break even on Bungie. The company is not really expecting any profit contribution from it this year, Totaki said. PlayStation profits are nevertheless top of mind at Sony these days. The headcount of its gaming group swelled in recent years as it went on an acquisition binge, but gaming profit had waned until a recent sign of recovery, as GameFile noted in February. Sony said it had 12,700 workers in its gaming network services division, inclusive of PlayStation, as at the end of March 2023, the most recent figure available. That was up from 10,200 at the end of March 2022. The overall headcount for all of Sony had been declining every year since 2009, aside from the bump of 2017. It finally grew again in 2022 and 2023. When it did, more than half of the added workers were in its gaming division. But Sony's game group has been reporting slimmer profits even as it takes in more money. A chart from Sony's 2023 corporate report shows the games division's revenue soaring, but Sony's music division started to make.
So this thing gave me
In
nothing?
this past spring, Sony elevated two PlayStation veterans to co-CEO roles under Totaki. In a note marking their new positions,
Co-CEO,
wrote,
co-CEO, like shit was fucked for a while. Who the fuck does co-CEO? I'll tell you who does co-CEO. People that their building's on fire. Like, yeah, this is some kind of like drastic times call for drastic decisions situation. Yeah, they still are. Yeah, this is bad.
expectations for us are high, and we aim to drive improving profitability. That's the name of the game right now. Now, the alternate history is worse. Publicly, among 4 ex-Bungie sources GameFile spoke with, there was little animosity for Sony over the cuts. The blame falling to Bungie management for promising unrealistic growth. Destiny is a live service game. It makes money when players who sample it for free decide to spend money on optional cosmetic items for their character and for new adventures offered via expansions such as Lightfall and the Final Shape. It is interesting here too, man. Because I would say years ago, that animosity was toward Activision. Anytime when something negative popped up, the company would rally in a way. You saw it happen after Forsaken. They rallied and pretty much put the middle finger up to Activision. But here, they're not getting that. They're blaming Bungie. What did Activision say about Forsaken? I'm pretty sure they said it was disappointing. Big game publishers and studios hope that a live service game with a dedicated user base will provide regular revenue for years.
I have to pee again.
Players' enthusiasm to play any live service can wane. A problem
This is
is
the
that
thing, bro. Like, if you start investing in live service, that shit can just fall apart right out from under you. The fact that Asman's not heard of co-CEO is a fine display of business ignorance. That's a... It's not that I haven't heard of it. It's that in every circumstance while I have heard of it, it's done in a case... You're getting banned for that, right? It'd be rude. Every circumstance where I have heard of this has been a extreme circumstance that is problematic. There is some sort of issue that needs to be dealt with. That's my point that I'm making. My old company had co-CEOs and we fucking tanked. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm really trying to get at. It's not that it's necessarily one specific thing. It's that this is a specific issue. Right? If the company's too big for one CEO, yeah. Co-CEO implies a bit of a power struggle. Yeah, that's got to be a problem. So yeah. And let's see. I'll look at this here real quick. You don't need 2 captains for 1 boat. Yeah, exactly.
aspirated when players move on to other newer and or more popular.
Somebody says I've seen two CEOs for co-founders. You're not listening. Like, damn, bro. Like, damn, bro. Why are people so dumb? Like, that's not what I fucking said. I'm saying, like, if the leadership of the company makes this change, like, obviously if a company starts this way, it's a different dynamic. I'm saying, like, if you start with one thing and you change it, this is a dramatic change. And yes, having accountability displaced over 2 people like that causes a ton of fucking problems. If you can't see that, you're out of your fucking mind. Yeah, like, what do you mean? Time and place where it's not a bad thing? I'm sure that there are times and places where it's not a problem, but I'm saying every time that I've seen it, it's been because there was a problem. Absolutely.
Other games. Destiny 2 has become one of those and was slipping. Bungie's next game, Marathon Like Destiny, is also designed to be a live service game. Sony touted its Bungie acquisition as a means to gain profitable live service gaming expertise. It planned for Bungie to spread its knowledge to other PlayStation teams while running as a quasi-independent shop. Multiple Sony executives sit on Bungie's board. Well, look at there. Multiple Sony executives sit on Bungie's board. As reported by IGN in December. But Bungie leaders have held a majority. Sony nevertheless has leverage over Bungie managers to perform, lest they lose their jobs, 2 sources noted. For all the stresses of the Sony deal on Bungie, one well-connected former worker at the studio told GameFile, the alternate history where Sony doesn't buy Bungie is worse. The alternate history is insolvency. This is what we were told before. We were told that Bungie essentially took the deal with Sony because they were treading water. But here's the thing, man. If you don't address how you got insolvent in the first place, or damn near it, somebody is spending too much dough, too much money.
It's not somebody, it's Pete. Pete's the CEO. It's his fault. He's responsible. That's nobody else's fault. It's his fault. Now, he can say that, oh, it's not my fault, it's the person below me's fault. Yeah, but it's your fault that it's their fault.
Somebody going way too crazy. Look, I know everybody.
That's just the way it is.
I'm not saying you shouldn't, but
no, that's the way it is. See, that's the reason. See, this is the issue. It's like when you get $2 million to buy a bunch of fucking vintage cars and shit, the other side of that is that when things don't go right, you better fucking be there taking accountability. See, that's the other side. Everybody sees like, oh, CEOs, wow, they get all this money and everything. Yeah, but that money ain't for fucking free. That money is because if something goes wrong, it's your head on the chopping block. That's the reason why. It's his responsibility. Like that leadership, like that's accountability. Absolutely accountability.
It's not Pete and his cause. They're spending it somewhere, but it wasn't the 2.3 million on 3.6 billion. Now who knows what the payout was? I mean, dude, the only thing that makes sense is they took the $3.6 billion, they put it in a Doge, and it was at 72 cents. And then it went south really fast, man. But, you know, they bought into it. They bought it at the high. How did that money disappear? What happened? What happened? That's a lot of money. You could have literally I don't know, you could have bought treasury bills. I don't know how much they need liquid on them at all times. I'm gonna just say this. I wouldn't be surprised if something comes out in the next year or so and we find out some crazy stuff, like something crazy happened. I mean, this just sounds like, who was the guy back in 07, Bernie Madoff? This is Madoff. I'm just saying, I mean, that money of that amount, who the hell happened? Who's auditing? Someone's gotta have their own, like, someone's gotta be auditing.
No, inside of a company like Bungie, losing $2 million. It's super easy to lose $2 million. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't think that really shows a whole lot at all. Like, that's not a lot of money. Like, this is a $3 billion company. Oh, sorry, $2 million. Yeah, $2 million. Yeah, bro, that's nothing. That is absolutely fucking nothing for a company this big, man. Yeah, Garment losing $1 million. Yeah. I mean, like, it's not even close. So, I really don't think that says a lot, but what does say a lot, this is what my opinion is. The fact that the CFO came out and said that they were fucking up with money. Because, like, in my opinion, I think that for somebody to say that publicly, that means that they have to really be public. Because, like, if he says, oh, we're making mistakes, that means that, like, they probably, like, you know, a 3 from him is like a 7 or an 8 in like, real life, you know?
They did build a brand new downtown Philadelphia. Facilities and policy areas. Yeah, I know the facility you're talking about. First of it's a lease. Second, that was done before. That lease was locked in before COVID. Like 2019. that is. How much money that is?
Inside of the audit, there's like a acceptable like rate of money that's unaccounted for. Like usually, unless you're doing like a government audit, they're probably not one for one. So like if they get 98% of the way there, it's like okay.
A top heavy team. Layoffs have been ripping through the games industry for 2 years, costing over 20,000 workers jobs.
That's fucking stupid. No, it's not.
Scrap by game developers. Nor pundits, executives, developers,
it's pragmatic.
Claim a come down to the pandemic-driven boom of 20. Much of the world's population was locked indoors and needed entertainment. The pattern has emerged of gaming giants that added hundreds or thousands of workers in recent years, now cutting a large chunk of those roles. That's been the case with Sony, as well as Activision, 9,800 workers in 2021 versus 13,000 in 2022. Riot, where co-CEO Mark Merrill said a January layoff of 11% of his workforce followed a period where headcount doubled and more. A variation of those headcount expansion challenges set in at Bungie, which have become top-heavy with the management, according to two former members of the studio. On the one hand, it's an interesting byproduct.
I really think that Elon Musk firing all those people from Twitter and Twitter's still working. I think that everybody in the business world saw that and said, why don't we do that? I think that was a big deal. Because I think that there's always been like, the people like this like to, and this is another big issue, is that especially in these software development companies, it seems like this is the case, but it's probably everywhere, is that a lot of people like creating an apparatus that they can exist in that diffuses accountability. So like when something goes wrong or some mistake happens or whatever, it doesn't really matter because no one person is accountable for it. There's like 5 different people that are accountable for it. And in the process of that, you remove any sort of accountability. You can't solve problems. Making solutions for things is more cumbersome, and basically everything gets worse. Right? And so, and this is what bureaucracy does. This is bureaucracy in a government. It's bureaucracy in a company. It's bureaucracy anywhere. So, yeah, I mean, I think, and the top gets richer, right? So you have like these middle management, like, oh, we need somebody to tell somebody what to do. Why do you need that? And so I think that now there's a lot of companies that are looking at like, why is it that we're hiring all of these people? Like, what's really the advantage here?
Loving Bungie, one source said. People stuck around at the company rather than splitting it for another studio. On the other, we needed more people to do the actual work. Yeah, I think this part right here is probably the most important. The result has been the de facto demotion of some senior members of the studio, down to more hands-on roles in the company's games. A move that has also shaken up teams and left some developers at Bungie feeling squeezed. Yeah, it's weird, man. So there were demotions of senior members at the studio.
Good, probably because they deserved it. I mean, that's what happens. Like, that's good. Like, because I think one of the big problems that a lot of people have is that bad decisions are made inside of a company, and there's no accountability at the top end of who's actually doing something wrong. It's like, oh yeah, people like, oh yeah, there's a mistake that happens, and like, you know, a bunch of like low-rung people get fired. I think everybody hates that.
I bet there was a lot of people that got moved up to those roles, those lead roles and stuff like that. And what happened is their team probably got cut or eventually let go, or they were put on an incubation project that obviously nothing came out of it. Probably took the demotion to keep their jobs too. Yeah. Now Destiny isn't enough. For more than 200 Bungie workers, the priority now is how to find work in a rough market. The day of the layoffs, there were at least glimmers of hope as developers from EA, Microsoft's 343 Industries, and others said they had some open roles. For the rest of the workers at Bungie, the challenge would be whether the studio can turn itself around. More than 850 people will remain working on Destiny and Marathon, Parsons said. At the moment, only Destiny 2 is making the studio any money. The game's June expansion to the final shape was critically acclaimed and held as a high point in the decade-long Destiny saga, and yet it sold less than Lightfall. The former Bungie sources told GameFile, comparing the 2 expansion launch sales. Even the rosiest sales for the final shape probably...
The game's played out. Like, if they made Destiny 3, I would play it. But I'm not going to get into Destiny 2. Like, it's just too much. It's played out. Like, it's the same thing as WoW. Dude, it's the final DLC. Is it really the final DLC? Well, either way, right? I mean, like, what I'm saying is that a game, and this is what happened with WoW, is like the game had so many expansions, and there were so many things that you had to know, and there was so much that was, like, part of it, that you couldn't just play the game anymore. You had to, like, do all of this extra. There's too much going on. So people wouldn't play WoW because they're like, listen, there's all this stuff going on in WoW. I don't want to deal with all this. I just want to play a fresh game. And I think the same thing, like for me, I'm talking about that personally for Destiny. That's probably the biggest reason right now I don't play Destiny. If they make Destiny 3, I'll play it. But if they make another expansion for Destiny 2, it's just too much, man.
Couldn't have single-handedly turned things
PoE,
around.
yeah.
Financials just don't work, they say. Destiny is an incredibly expensive game to make. Then how did you make it for 10 years? I don't understand. If Destiny is an incredibly expensive game to make, how has it been made for 10 years? By being owned by a larger studio, probably got more expensive as it became more top-paid. Okay, that's a good point. So what you're saying is, as those ground developers and the studio continued to grow, everyone moved up to managerial roles. On top of that, you know, salaries also went up with that. Yeah, I got you. Again, though, things still don't add up. Right down here, this final line here, right? The final line right here. Destiny is an incredibly expensive game to make. Okay, Destiny is an incredibly expensive game to make. How much of that is Destiny being expensive to make, or the other 4 or 5 games you forgot over there in incubation? You take sandbox developers and other developers off of Destiny to go make a game that you didn't even put out the door. What is those losses? Are they just falling under Destiny, that umbrella? You're just saying, look at this.
That's probably not true. I doubt that they're saying that the incubation money is the same as Destiny. I bet Destiny does take a lot of money to make. I mean, fuck, Genshin Impact takes a lot of money to make. I could easily assume that to be true. Yeah, sure, why not?
Disney losing all this money. I don't think anyone in their mind, I mean, like, other than Sony, obviously, would think that, hey, we're going to take one game and use this one game's revenue to essentially finance 3 to 4 other games. I mean, in my opinion, Marathon, okay, unless
they did that with WoW.
They're doing right now, consolidate and just have, but beforehand, consolidate and just have everyone work on Destiny and Marathon. No, dude, guys, I'm gonna ride this ship all the way down, man. What are you talking about? We're not going.
What did this person say?
No, dude.
Have you said goodbye video? Oh,
guys, I'm gonna ride this ship all the way down, man.
That's sad.
We're not going. You know,
goodbye
I already
video
told you.
for the
I
game.
log in on my Titan. Yeah,
Man.
I'm 100 right now. Bungie's gonna be like, we're closing the servers today. We will log in. I will keep a macro on forever, and we will stay logged in post-death. I might add. I think back in 2020 when we heard about all the incubation projects and people moving away from D2 didn't sound.
Yeah.
Look, I'm telling you, we honestly, we may end up doing a fully edited video of how everything happened. It wasn't just the incubation projects that Bungie was naming. It was the crazy hiring sprees that they were doing. It was all the positions changing. Suddenly, everyone that was at Bungie were moved to different roles, different positions, and all of it were promotion. It was like promotion, promotion, promotion. Hiring spree, hiring spree. Yeah, I agree with the statement right there. You had all these promotions and then no one was actually working on the games. Here's what I'm wondering. How many people got let go that actually worked on the game versus the people in these managerial roles? And the other side of things is I don't entirely blame the people that got promotions. You do a good job at a company, you eventually get promoted.
Sure, yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
No one told Bungie, though, to blow things up as if we were going to be in lockdown during COVID for the next day. Maybe that was projected. Maybe during that moment, they were like, hey, we're about to be in
I don't
lockdown.
think they need to like really go and turn this into some situation. I think it's probably Destiny and Bungie experienced the exact same thing that every other company experienced during COVID. They overhired for roles that they didn't really need, and in the process of that, they brought on a lot of people that when the market normalized, they didn't need anymore, and then now they're getting rid of them. It's really not that complicated. That's what, COVID overhiring, like every company has had this happen basically, like whether it was, I think Blizzard has done layoffs, I know Microsoft has, I mean, like, Xbox did a ton of them. They shut down entire studios. Like, this is happening everywhere. It's nothing like, honestly, it would be weird if Destiny and Bungie didn't have this happen. Because the layoffs are the norm now. And yeah, Intel laid off 15,000 people. Think about that. That's more people that work at the entire company.
Years, we've got COVID. Everybody's going to be indoors. They need video games.
That's crazy.
Regardless, this is a great article here by Steven. If you guys want to check it out, game file as well. This is a paid for article though, just to let you know. We'll continue to check out his work and Jason's work and see what comes from that.
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.
Yeah, I'll link y'all this video. I mean, like, it's a sad fact where the game is at, right? It is. And like, this is just gaming in general. Intel minus 33% the other days. Yeah, no, for sure. And infinite progression meta not working. Yeah, I know. Good video, absolutely. Like, yeah, it's good to see that Lifelong Murder so many people's hype for the final shape. I'm not really surprised. Yeah, this is one thing that a lot of people might not realize is like the lowered sales and like I think that probably the decreased enthusiasm that happened in WoW for Dragonflight. I think it actually happened in what do you call it? In Shadowlands. It just took until Dragonflight for people to notice, right? That's what happened. I'll be right back.
You gotta love it, man. From Software, Dragon Fights, you gotta love it.
This place is drenched in blood, swarming with Mohg's servants, and the crumbling palace itself is awash with the formless mother's blood flame. But it was not always this way. The map of Mohgwyn Palace reads, "In the lightless depths lies the cave of an ancient civilization. It is here Mohg, the Lord of Blood, is building his palace, to be the seat of his coming dynasty, named Mohgwyn." So, this ancient civilization existed long before Mohg. What was this place? This ancient dynasty isn't given a name, but everything here should look very familiar. The underground woodland evokes the one found in Shifra. The statues depict the same bearded figure as the statues in Uld and Ul. These are the remains of an ancient dynasty that can be found all over the lands between, and Mohg has very intentionally started to build his dynasty on the remains of their own. Mohg calling his rule a dynasty is intentionally evocative of the ancient dynasty. We know about this ancient dynasty because of the oracle bubbles, which are the sorceries of the claymen who served as priests in the ancient dynasty. The description goes on to state, the claymen search for lost oracles within their bubbles. And there's a whole video to be had on this topic, so I won't go too deep into this for now, especially since their culture doesn't really seem relevant to Mohg at all. Because I don't think Mohg is intent on reviving the old dynasty or continuing it. Rather, item descriptions stress that his is a new dynasty, and if there's anything from the old dynasty that he does use, like the architectural remains of the palace, or even possibly the antiquated Latin that he speaks, I feel he might be trying to evoke the old dynasty because he might have envied how widespread the old dynasty was, and I think he wants his dynasty to have this air of legitimacy, something it sorely lacks at the moment. Mohg's new dynasty is very different from the old. The Swarm of Flies incantation sums it up well and reads, "The new palace of the Lord of Blood lies in a swamp of festering blood." These flies can be cast as a Blood Oath incantation, which are spells directly linked to Mohg's own power. But aside from the incantation, these flies also spawn from the blood-tainted excrement that you can loot in this area, which contain dense colonies, tiny eggs of unknown but assuredly revolting origin. The roped fly pot elaborates, stating, "The maggots found in waste feed on blood and turn into vicious flies that are pitiably short-lived. Their fangs inflict countless lacerations on the victim, while the grating sound of their wings assails their sanity." And specifically, these flies spawn from the excrement of carnivorous beasts, of which there are now many in the new dynasty, all festering with these bloody pustules and being even tougher than their kin on the surface. So, yeah, not a great place. And yet, many disenfranchised beings still seem to choose to reside here. So, the festering blood is full. Which brings us to Albinaurics. In a way, the Albinaurics themselves have accursed blood, not like the Omen. The Albinauric blood clot reads, "Albinaurics are life forms made by human hands. Thus, many believe them to live impure lives, untouched by the Erd Tree's grace." Now, this is just my own speculation, but we know that the Formless Mother bestows power upon accursed blood. So do you think maybe it's fitting that of all the creatures in this blood-soaked land, many of the Albinaurics have found a way to weaponize the blood? I think they've accepted Mohg's tainted blood quite well. The red Albinaurics stand apart from their silver kin, who sit jagged upon the cliff face. The red ones patrol the area, fight with attacks that are actually unique from every other Albinauric. Even their model is a little bit unique, beyond just being red. Look at their heads and you'll see these tiny little omen horns sprout up. Personally, I believe this is because they've been soaking in blood. Specifically, I think they've been tainted by Mohg's omen blood. We know from the Seedbed Curse icon and Dung Eater questline that it's possible to spread horns. At least that horns are an aspect of a defilement that can be spread. So I think that explains why there's guarding horns here. And there is also evidence that reveals Mohg was attempting to share his accursed blood with others. This leads us to Vare and the war surgeons who were abducted by Mohg, who wanted to see if they could tame the accursed blood. As you enter the Mohgwyn Palace grounds, 3 white-robed invaders assail you, one after the other. These are the nameless White Masks, and they kind of have fascinating lore to speak of. The White Masks wear the War Surgeon gown, which marks them as war surgeons, who were effectively mercy killers. The dagger talisman elaborates, stating that the white-garbed field surgeons come to the aid of friend and foe alike by dealing a final deadly thrust to spare them from the prolonged agony of a mortal wound. So their name is a bit misleading, as there isn't really any surgery occurring here that could save someone's life. Their favored weapon is the Mesericor, a dagger with a name that translates to mercy. It reads, "Dagger favored by military physicians in white. Medicine is mercy, and mercy upon the battlefield is ruthless." The White Mask's weapon is found in a storage corner of Stormvale, and their talisman is found in Volcano Manor, so it's kind of difficult to say which faction they served, if any. After all, they delivered death equally to friend and foe, so they were probably a common sight on the battlefields of the Shattering, regardless of their allegiance. Their choice of white clothing is curious as well. In war, white is the color of truce, which is appropriate for these somewhat neutral characters, and incidentally I think white also shows bloodstains a lot more starkly, and maybe that's why the color was chosen as well. These characters definitely got their hands dirty as they delivered their mercy, but constantly delivering mercy would eventually cause them to turn depraved. The dagger talisman ends with the line, "A sense of mercy is a catalyst for bloodlust," and their weapon warns one to beware the killers clothed as men of compassion. So the war surgeons inevitably developed this taste for blood, and it was this very fact that eventually led to them being targeted and abducted by Mohg. The war surgeon gown reads, "Of the surgeons that were abducted by the Lord of Blood, none were able to tame the accursed blood, none but Vare, that is, though he was an exception." Therefore, the war surgeons, these nameless white masks that assail you in Mohgwyn Palace, ended up here because they were unexpectedly abducted by the Lord of Blood. This reveals that Mohg was searching for potentates who might be able to control the accursed blood that he had been graced with. It's more proof that he was looking to share his accursed blood with others, and considering these surgeons now invade on behalf of Mohg, it seems clear that they were happy, on some level, to have this new violent outlet for their bloodlust, though only one of their number actually manages to tame the accursed blood as Mohg desired, and that's Vare. But what does that really mean, to tame the accursed blood? Well, earlier we speculated that the Albinaurics are growing horns because they've been doused not just in blood, but in Mohg's accursed omen blood. And I really do think that there's a lot of evidence that Mohg is trying to find worthy recipients who can tame his essence, because instead of the phrase "tame the accursed blood," the original Japanese actually says something a bit closer to "accept the accursed blood," which brings me to this interaction with Vare, where he gives you a wound and you accept what is assumedly Mohg's noble blood.
Give me your food. This noble blood will be an immutable badge of honor once it settles inside of you. Oh, good heavens! Clench your teeth or something.
The bloody finger item, which is your finger, I might add, reads, "Glistening blood has been siphoned into the nail of this finger. Its sickly pale skin feels nothing now, but the nail still aches with the sweetest pain."
Never forget that feeling of agony, for it is what binds you to Luminary Moog, to all of us.
And with a fresh infusion of this accursed, noble blood, you can invade other Tarnished and sate your bloodlust, materializing out of blood in other worlds, just like Moog does. But that's not the only way that you can invade with what is assumedly Moog's blood. You can also do so with a festering bloody finger. These are consumable items, and they're not your finger this time, and 3 of them are given to you by Vare, and he gives them to you as a test of sorts.
Oh, I have a gift for you, something fit only for the wise. A means for circumventing the draw of the 2 fingers. Give it a try, won't you?
Vare is hoping that you'll use these to fuel a bloodlust of your own, thereby distracting you from the allure of the 2 fingers, who have other plans for you as a Tarnished. And if you prove this bloodlust to Vare, you'll be inducted into their order, and you'll have blood infused into you, perhaps as he and other war surgeons once received.
I knew it from the very start. You have a taste for noble blood.
As opposed to the bloody finger you can receive, these consumable, festering bloody fingers are blackened with blood congestion. And if you look closely, what looked like omen horns appear to be writhing at the end, reinforcing the idea again that it's Moog's accursed blood that had been injected into these fingers before they were cut off. The description goes on to state that these festering fingers have been chopped off rather unceremoniously. The lack of ceremony indicates a measure of disappointment with the owner of these fingers, I think. And that's why I think these fingers once belonged to other inductees, just like the nameless war surgeons who failed to accept the infusion of Moog's blood. Note this dialogue from Vare if you deny him.
You will die nameless, without ceremony.
So, the nameless war surgeons are likely also those whose fingers were unceremoniously chopped off, it seems. They're a warning of what could happen to you if you listen to Vare's speech, which is enticing in its splendor, but full of deadly consequence. Despite this harsh treatment of his subjects, Moog is different to the 2 fingers, according to Vare, at least.